Right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Kirstenbosch Wednesday talk, brought to you by Room to Grow, Sandy and Straight Nature. Just like to start off with thanks to our sponsor, Straight Nature. Straight Nature is a leading specialist in natural history publishing in Southern Africa, associated with the best-selling and most highly regarded field guides in the region. Straight Nature publishes full-color illustrated books across a variety of subject areas, including birds, mammals, reptiles, trees and flowers, the marine environment, geology, astronomy, general wildlife, and of course, children's nature. I'm very grateful to have them continued support with our talks. And then Room to Grow. Room to Grow has been designing and creating outdoor living spaces in and around Cape Town since 2002. And we offer a complete suite of landscape design, construction, and associated design elements for our residential, commercial, and retail clients. And you can find out more about us at roomtogrow.co.za or on our socials, Instagram and Facebook. And then it's my pleasure today to introduce Willem Frost. Willem is a game ranger, writer, and an amateur dendrologist with a strong commitment to conservation through sustainable use. He has spent decades in the African bush, exploring, studying, and photographing fauna and flora. He now lives in South Africa's Bushveld region on the Mattelbas River, near its confluence with the Limpopo. His previous book, The Antelope of Africa, tells the story of Africa's antelope in the fast-changing world. Today, he'll provide us with a look into the hidden intelligence of trees and the ways in which trees demonstrate qualities such as memory, communication, and problem-solving. Although our trees may not rival the towering giants of California in size, South Africa boasts some truly impressive specimens that are uniquely adapted to our environment. Willem will also touch on some of the challenges that our trees are facing. And the Ways of Wonder, South African trees, will be available at a special price during the week of the Kirstenbosch bookshop, or online, or at the gardens. And at the end of the talk, we will have some Q&A, some questions and answers with Willem. So during the talk, if you have any questions, please post those into the Q&A box, and we will get to them at the end of the talk. Willem, very much looking forward to this. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And greetings also to all our guests out there. I hope you all enjoy the talk. Let's get that, okay. So this is the book, The Ways and Wonders of South African Trees. And I'll just give you a very brief introduction. But you must please remember one or two things. You're not talking to a scientist this morning. I'm very much a non-scientist, but I have since my early days had quite an interest in trees, although I never studied botany or really biology. But I grew up amongst trees, and I've always been fascinated by them. So I'll very much give you a layman's view in many of the areas that we're going to touch on. And perhaps we should start off by talking about where do trees come from. Sorry, I've slipped the slide here. Okay. But we really want to start how long have trees been around, and what's the history of trees on this planet? Now, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but very briefly, the people who know, and some people who claim they know, they will tell us that planet Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. Now, there could be some argument around that and speculation, but let's not go down that rabbit hole. Let's just accept that Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. Now, for the first billion years, there was no life on this planet, they tell us. And then for the next 2 to 3 billion years, the only life was single-celled bacteria, and they lived in the water. The first plants appeared about 470 million years ago, but they were not trees. The trees were to follow a bit later. The first trees appeared 385 million years ago, and we know that from fossils that have been found in what is now the state of New York, and they were from the genus Matieza. They produced with spores, they're not seeds, just like the ferns that we have today around, and the tree ferns. But don't have to go to New York to see this. You can actually drive down to the Free State, to the town of Senekal, and around the Dutch Reformed Church, there are a couple of logs from fossilized trees of the Doxylon species of 300 to 200 million years ago. Interesting. If ever you drive through the Free State, don't miss out on Senekal. Go and see those big logs. And as most of you probably know, our coal reserves in this country, which are vast, they were formed by tree-like ferns from those eons back. Now, Homo sapiens, they tell me, is about 300 to 200,000 years ago it first appeared. There were, of course, previous, more primitive forms of Homo sapiens that goes back a bit further. But our species is about just over 200, 250,000 years ago. And I believe that we started talking as humans about 50,000 years ago. And since then, there have been 5 major mass extinctions on Earth. There were other extinctions as well. It's still happening around us, but there were 5 big ones, where we lost a lot of animal life and a lot of plant life. In fact, lost a lot of all biotic matter. But our planet is going strongly, despite some criticisms and concerns, and we'll touch on some of those. But plants today, I believe, covers about 99% of the planet's biomass. Now, that to me is quite an incredible number. If you consider that all the pachyderms, all the animals, all the humans, all together account for no more than 1% of the planet's biomass. That is quite significant. So trees have been around a long time. If you consider the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and trees appeared only about just less than 400 million years ago, trees is actually not that old. I mean, in the life cycle of the Earth, that's fairly recent. But where do we stand today? How is it with trees on planet Earth today? It is said that since man started agriculture about 12,000 years ago in the so-called Fertile Crescent, and that is the land area from Persia through Iraq up to the Mediterranean and down to Egypt. That's where we started with agriculture about 12,000 years ago. Since then, Earth has lost 50% of its trees. And we're still losing trees today to agriculture. But it's been estimated, there were 2 studies undertaken, and both came up with the number of about 3 trillion trees on the planet today. Until very recently, we did not know how many tree species we have on this planet. And then a group of scientists got together and they undertook a study, and they found that there were just over 65,000 species on Earth. It is, of course, the trees are not as diverse as some of the other living forms that we have, like the insects. They are much, much more diverse than trees. But 65,000 is, in any event, in my view, an impressive number. National Geographic has stated that 30% of the land mass on Earth is forest. But the important thing that conservationists and nature lovers are concerned about these days is that man has invaded each and every type of habitat on this planet. I mean, we now even live in the North Pole. And that has implications, because man, wherever man moves in, he changes the environment to suit himself and to change it for other land uses that would be more beneficial to him. According to the IUCN, and that's really the United Nations, in my view, of the conservation organizations of the world, 50% of the world's forests have already been cleared for other land uses. And this, as you know, is a big issue today. And people are up in arms about it all around the world. Despite that, Earth is still losing 7 million hectares plus per annum of forest, and that is equal to about 15 or 17% of all the greenhouse gases emitted into the atmosphere. Let me just find my cursor here. Oh, a second, there we go. So why are people so concerned about the deforestation that's taking place? The big issue is, of course, the carbon dioxide releases. And the deforestation release more carbon dioxide than all the world's vehicles put together. That is, all the ships, all the trains, all the aircrafts, all the trucks, all the vehicles, everything put together doesn't match the deforestation effects. So people telling us to now drive electric vehicles, if I look at this, I say, well, maybe we should think again about what we're doing here. I'm not totally convinced that the EVs are the way forward. I'm not against cleaner energy, but the problem clearly is the deforestation, not the use of fossil fuels. And of course, the second big concern is as we chop down our forests and we clear it for monoculture, agricultural uses, we reduce the ability of the forest to store the carbon dioxide in the plants that grow there. So those are all valid concerns, and it's quite right, I think, that the world is raising so many questions about this. Is there anything that we can do about deforestation? Of course there is. The short answer is just plant more trees. There was a study undertaken by Dr. Crowther in the UK, and his conclusion was that if we could plant 1.2 trillion trees, we will cancel out a decade of carbon dioxide that has been released into the atmosphere by other means. Now, that is a huge task. The question is, can we as humans plant 1.2 trillion trees? How on earth do you achieve that? That might take decades and decades, if not generations. But where there's a will, there is a way, as they say. So it can be done, and it has been done. People have been successful planting trees, but I think the future lies in new technology. And we've seen seed planting drones with biodegradable seed pods. And they scatter the seeds, and the seed pods over time disappear. And it seems to be quite effective. It's already in use in a couple of countries. And it probably has quite a future in restoring some of the lost forests. But there are other initiatives as well, like the carbon trading, some of you may have read about, where the polluting industry can offset the carbon emissions by investing in afforestation somewhere else. There are also incentives for developing countries to reduce carbon emissions from forest lands and to focus more on the carbon storage capacity in their countries. Well, these things or these initiatives, I think, will work. They have some potential, but for me, the big issue is plant more trees. That's really the big answer that we're looking for. We just have to find a way of doing it. How do we get more trees into the ground in the right places? There are also some concerns in that regard. You've got to be planting the trees very judiciously. To give you a silly example, but it illustrates the point, you can't go and plant the Cape fynbos full of trees. I mean, that would be silly. It would be counterproductive. You've got to plant the right species of trees in the right habitat. Then it will work. A project that gives me much hope for the future is the so-called Great Green Wall project in the Sahel. You may have read or heard that there's been for a long time concern that the Sahara Desert is marching south and it's moving towards the forests of Central Africa. So, and the Sahel is that belt in between the forests and the desert. And it was getting drier and drier and less rain and less plant life. So the idea is to plant a great green wall that stretches from Senegal in the west to the Sudan in the east. And so far, they have recovered about 30, I'm not sure what the number is now, 18 million hectares. 18 million hectares. Get back to that slide. But the plan is by 2030 to restore 100 million hectares and 250 million tons of CO2 in those trees, and in the same process, at the same time, create about 10 million jobs. Now, I think these objectives are very optimistic, but with important things like this, I think it's better that you shoot high rather than low. So let's wish them luck. I made a point here about solar plants, and I think this is a South African problem. I think our country has now realized that we can't rely on Eskom to provide electricity for the country, not if it's the sole provider of electricity. So there are all sorts of initiatives to give alternative electricity to the country, and solar plants seem to be on the agenda. I expect that we're going to see a lot more about solar plants in the years to come. There is already a major solar plant planned for not far where I live from, about 40 kilometers or so. The issue there is that that is prime marula habitat with all sorts of other bushveld trees as well. But they're going to clear, I don't know how many thousand hectares, but it's a couple of thousand hectares that is to be cleared of marula and other trees so that we can put solar panels up. Now, the local community is not happy about this, but I think we've waited too long to stop this project. I'm not saying solar is a bad idea. It's a good idea, but again, you've got to do it judiciously, and you have to take in all the variables, take that into account, and look at what the consequences could be of what you're doing there with the solar plant. So solar plants is going to be an issue in the years to come, I believe. Let's just look overall at the current situation of trees. I mean, I've just made a few points about trees in the world today after a couple of 100 years, couple of 100 million years. Our indigenous forests are only 0.5% of our land surface. So that is very significant, and it has implications, as we'll see later on. So our country and our forests are not in the same position as those in the Amazon and Malaysia, Southeast Asia, or the Congo Basin to the north of us. Their forest clearing is a huge problem. Here in South Africa, it's not that much of a problem. The problems that we do, or the forests that we do have, I believe are reasonably well managed. There are a few problem areas, like the Duku forests and the Mapalaan forest in KwaZulu-Natal. I'm not really up to date with how it is going there now, but there was a time when people were just moving in there, cleaning the forest and preparing the fields to plant their crops. But in general, I think our forests are fairly well managed compared to many other places in the world, particularly in the rest of Africa. So most of our country is actually savanna or type of savanna. And our savannas are 80 times the forests that we have. And there was a study that was released in 2018 that suggested that even in the savannas, our we do have a bit of problem. The situation is a bit worse than what we thought. The release of CO2, what I found, was 3 to 6 times more than was thought at the end of at the time. And the reason for that, of course, is changes in land use. You will know that how many of our conservation areas are actually under pressure. They are also, again, I'm not saying they're not well managed. They are, I think, fairly well managed, given the situation and the circumstances in the country. But there's pressure on them. There's pressure for land use, other types of land use. We have, for instance, we have unsustainable harvesting of wood for charcoal, firewood, and timber export. The timber exports is not so much a big South African problem as it is in some of the countries to our north, but the charcoal and firewood industries, you drive out of our cities and you find these mountains of firewood being sold along the roads, and it's just unsustainable. Very often you will find that it is actually protected trees that are being sold there. So our problem is a little bit different, perhaps, to the Amazon. At one stage of my life, a couple of years ago, I used to fly over Zimbabwe quite often. And it was absolutely shocking to see how the trees are disappearing in that country. And to see the piles and piles of firewood and wood for charcoal lined up along the roads. I thought it was quite a dire situation. Very, very unhappy about it. I think we have spoken about the solar farms, the mining and the agriculture. They put pressure on the land that is or let me say the natural land, land under conservation. And the land under conservation is not only the nature and game reserves that are run by government or government agencies, but a lot of your private farms. I'm a game rancher, and I'm in game ranching not to make money out of the animals, although you have to do that to make a living. But the primary driving force is the conservation value of it. So you have all these game ranches over the country. There are about 10,000 of them, and they all make their own contribution towards conservation of habitat and what goes with it. But there is pressure. There is pressure. In our country, particularly the camel thorn and the Newtonia hildebrandi is being used for firewood. If you drive from Josini down to Cozy Bay, you will see the Newtonia hildebrandi, the Lebombo wattle, lined up along the road for miles and miles. And it's not a common tree. It's relatively common up in Maputo land, but it's got a very limited distribution range. So there is some concern about the future of Newtonia hildebrandi. Camel thorn is a protected tree, but we still see it being sold as firewood along the roads. Big concern. The large false mopane is a tree of great concern. They get quite big, these trees, and we don't have them in our country. I know of a few in the north of the Kruger Park, but otherwise we don't have them. You don't find them here. But they grow on Kalahari sand, and you get them in the northwest of Zimbabwe and in Botswana and the Caprivi strip and in the southwest of Zambia and in Angola. And there they are being chopped down left, right, and center. And it's being exported. It's also known in the timber trade as rosewood. And it's particularly popular among the Chinese and the Vietnamese. And these trees are felled and they are exported to those countries where it's turned into highly priced furniture. They are as keen on that as we are probably on yellow wood and stinkwood. And that is, I believe, an Africa-wide problem. It's not a problem solely of our country, the plundering of our forests by foreigners. And it includes the Western countries as well. There's a lot of this wood that's going to Europe and even to America. And the tree may be protected, and there may be legislation to try and stop the export of it. But conservation requires more than paperwork. You can write laws and regulations and what have you, but there are people that have to implement it. And if they are corrupt, the product will just keep flowing out of the country. Okay. Now I'd like to touch on the oldest and the biggest and the tallest trees that we have. Because this is quite an interesting subject. When we talk about the oldest trees, we have to differentiate between clonal and non-clonal trees, and recognize a layering. Now, by layering, the best example I could think of immediately was the Wonderboom fig in Pretoria, where what happens is it's got quite a wide crown. The leaves droop down to the ground. They touch the ground. Eventually, they take root and they form another layer of trunks around the mother trunk. And so the tree keeps growing. And those trunks are all the same tree. So it's not new trees. Now, the trees that have cloned, that is usually what happens is there are new shoots coming out from the same root system, and they form new trunks all around the tree. And again, it's not a new tree, it's exactly the same tree, It just produces new trunks. So the oldest clonal trees that we're aware of are some Huon pines out in Tasmania, and they are just over 10,000 years old. Some of the individual trunks may not be that old, but as an entire system, that tree is 10,000 years plus. In Sweden, there's a Norwegian spruce that is just over 9,500 years old when it was tested, carbon tested. In Utah, in the US, there is a quaking aspen forest that is just absolutely remarkable. It covers 107 acres, and there are 47,000 trees, but they're not really trees, they are stems of the same root system. And this, I guess, must be the world's biggest living organism. If there is a bigger one, I haven't heard of it yet. It'll be interesting if any of you have heard of anything bigger than this tree with the 47,000 stems. Please let me know, then I'd be very interested in it. When you go to non-clonal trees or conventional trees, the oldest are the bristlecone pines. There is one that is called Methuselah because of its age, and it's in the White Mountains of California. When it was tested, it was found to be 4,852 years old. Since then, another one has been found, same bristlecone pine, but that was just over 5,000 years old. And interestingly enough, the location of this tree is being held secret. Nobody is supposed to know where it is. And I think for good reason, because there was another one that was about 4,900 years old, and that was cut down in 1964. So we don't want that to happen again. Then I have heard about the Patagonian cypress in Chile, and that is, they reckon, between 3,600 and 5,500 years old. It's a pity we can't get a more accurate guess, but that's what the estimate is. So these trees can get quite old, particularly the non-clonal and the underground trees. We'll talk about underground trees just now again. South Africa's oldest trees are the baobabs. There was one near Hoedspruit that was carbon dated, 1,840 years. Now, interestingly enough, I've read in a number of instances where people claim the baobabs get to be 5,000 years old. You've got to take that with a pinch of salt. I don't think they get that old. 1,800 to maybe just over 2,000. I know of one that they believe is about 2,200 years old. That's about the age that the old baobab can get. There's another fascinating tree, and I'll show you a photo a little later on a cabbage tree. As you know, cabbage trees don't get very big. And it's not a very tough, strong, big tree, but this one grows in a forest. And it is estimated to be about 2,200 years old, which is, in my view, just incredible. But wait till I show you the picture. They're also, the leadwoods are also regarded as some of our oldest trees. I'm being told that leadwood, and that is by people who supposedly know, if a leadwood grows in an area where it's not disturbed or damaged when it's a young tree, it can take up to 1,000 years to become a full mature tree. Now, as you know, it's not called leadwood for nothing. the wood is extremely heavy. And if you take a piece of wood, throw it in the water, it will sink like a rock. But if it's a mature tree, it could then take up to another 1,000 years for the tree to die. And once it's dead, it can take up to another 1,000 years to decompose and go back into the soil. So that's a full cycle of about 3,000 years. Obviously, that doesn't happen to all the baobabs. It doesn't happen all the time. It happens under specific circumstances. But it just shows you what can be achieved. The question is, how do trees reach this old age? How do they become so old? Well, just remember that because a tree is big, it's not necessarily old. But there's always exceptions, and we've just talked about the baobabs, and that's a very good exception. It is a huge tree, but they also get quite old. And the wood is not worth much, yet it gets very old. It seems to me that the hardwood trees, like the leadwoods, the camel thorns, and so on, they grow much older than the softwood trees, like some of the acacias and the coniferous, that don't make it that long. Also, it is believed that trees that grow in forests get much older than trees out on the savanna. I first read this theory when it was written by Peter Wolleben in one of his books. But I take that also with a pinch of salt, because here in South Africa, I've seen that some of our savanna trees are really the old ones. Like the leadwoods, you don't get leadwoods in the forests. So I'm not so sure about that, but big and age is not the same thing. The biggest trees in the world, you all must know this one, the General Sherman. It stands in California, a giant sequoia. It has a height of 83 meters and a trunk diameter of 7.7 meters. Now, that is a giant. But there was a coastal redwood that was bigger. The Cornell Creek giant was bigger. It was taller, but it was cut down in the 1940s. I'm not sure about the circumstances about felling that tree, but fact is, it is no more. There was another coastal redwood called the Lindsay Creek tree, and that was apparently twice the size of the General Sherman. By the way, it's the General Sherman is the one on this photo. But you can't really get a good idea of the size of this tree because we don't have anything to compare with for size. But in any event, that Lindsay Creek tree was destroyed in 1905 by a storm. That must have been one of the biggest trees the world has seen. The important thing when we talk about biggest trees, however, is to discuss how do you measure size. The US and the RSA have different methods. In the US, they are more concerned about the volume of the tree. But in South Africa, the Dendrological Society has developed an index, and we work on the index values of our trees. I'll give that to you just now. If you go to look for the biggest trees in South Africa, I would always have thought those forests of the Southern Cape, that is where you find them, because that's where the big yellow woods are. But strangely enough, it's not. In my experience, the biggest trees are in what used to be known as the Transvaal, and particularly in Limpopo and Mpumalanga. But also, if you go across the border into the Tuli block in Botswana, that is very dry country. Yet there are some massive, massive trees. And I'll tell you about one or two of them just now. So Limpopo and across the border in Botswana, that's where you find the big ones. Now, here is our South African formula for calculating the size of a big tree. You take the height, the mean crown spread, the circular crown cover, the girth of the trunk diameter at breast height, which is taken to be at 1.4 meters height, and you register that in a mathematical formula, which I'm not going to bore you with now, and then you get to an index value. And here is the biggest tree in South Africa, probably known to many of you, if not most of you. That is the Sagole baobab. It stands on the northern foot of the Soutpansberg in what used to be Venda land. It is just one huge, enormous monster. But if we think this is a big tree, listen to this. Across the border, in the Tuli block near the confluence of the Shashi and the Limpopo rivers, there is a sycamore fig that is much bigger than this one. The trunk, of course, is not as wide, but the height is much more impressive. It's got much high, it grows much higher, and the crown spread is just much bigger than our baobab. But in any event, this is the biggest tree in South Africa. The tallest trees, there's a coastal redwood, which has been nicknamed Hyperion, also in California, of course. It's 115.6 meters when it was last measured. Now, this is very impressive if you bear in mind that this is the above ground measurement. The roots have not been included in this measurement. And that could be another 40, 50 or 60 meters, who knows. We don't have anything in South Africa or in Africa that comes near this. The tallest tropical tree that I'm aware of is a yellow Meranti. It was measured in Malaysia at 110 meters. Also much, much bigger than anything we have. The tallest tree that we have is a Teyama mahogany. It's one of the Entandophragmas, and it is 81.5 meters tall. Now, let me just interrupt myself here. There are some eucalyptus trees in Magubus Kloof in Limpopo that are the same height, in fact, just slightly taller. But they're not native trees. They are aliens. And I have excluded them. Throughout this presentation, whenever I talk about big trees, I talk about the indigenous trees of South Africa. I've excluded all the aliens. The tallest tree in South Africa is a yellowwood, Afrocarpus falcatus. And it's not in the Southern Cape, as you might think. It's actually on the Blouberg, which is to the west of the Soutpansberg. And that is at 41 meters. Shortly on its heels is a sneezewood at Straalhoek in the Eastern Cape at 40 meters. And we had a sneezewood, and this shows you how big they can get, at the Downs near Tsanin, and that one was 46 meters. But it has died a few years back, and it has fallen down, so it is no more. But at 46 meters, that's hell of an impressive for a sneezewood. Potentially, there is another Afrocarpus falcatus near Amersfoort in Mpumalanga. We think that might be the highest tree in South Africa, in fact, but we're not 100% sure of the height. And it has been measured, but it stands at the slope of a mountain, and it's very difficult to get a correct measurement on the height because it's also amongst some dense undergrowth. So they use the clinometer, but there is some doubt regarding the height of that tree. So it'll be measured again. And that might, in fact, be the tallest known tree in the country. The thickest trees, there's a Montezuma cypress in the south of Mexico, 11,6. But our Sagole baobab is not far behind. It is just about there at almost 11 meters diameter. And our baobab is in fact the second thickest tree in the world. And we have a couple of other baobabs that are not far off. That's good competition for this one. I just want to show you here a few pictures of some of our biggest trees in this country, which maybe you'll find interesting. This, I believe, is the biggest jackalberry, Diosporus mespoliformis, that we have in South Africa. As you can see, it is a real giant of a tree. Sorry, you just can't get a picture in because there's too much growth of other plants around it. But it's a monster. This is the biggest marula that we have in South Africa. And you can see there's yours truly standing next to it, just to give you an indication of, or give you scale, so you can see how big this thing is. It's me again. This is the second biggest marula in the country. And this is, we measured it and took the pictures just a little bit earlier in the year. And we have now found, I can tell you, a third one, which we believe is actually, or could be, the biggest marula in the country. We have to confirm the height. We haven't accurately measured the height yet, but that will be done shortly. Here is that cabbage tree, I think I mentioned a little earlier. Cussonia spicata. You will know, you must have seen these trees because they're quite common in the country, but they're relatively small trees. But this one is growing in a forest. And here, Peter Volleybin was right. This forest tree is much bigger than the ones that you get outside of the forests. It is a real monster. This tree is estimated to be 2,200 years old. So it was around at the time when Jesus walked on earth. And it's accessible to the public. You can go and see it. If you want to go there, drop me a note and I'll tell you how to get there. Faidherbia albida, also known as the anna tree. Look at this monster. This is the biggest anna tree in the country. They haven't got a very deep-rooted root system, so they always grow near water. And this one is standing on the banks of the Limpopo River. And it is by far the biggest anna tree in the country. Magnificent tree. And I also love them for other reasons. They're known in English also as the winter thorn. And the reason is that it is a thorn tree. They used to belong to acacia, but they've been taken out since. And they produce their flowers, their fruit, and even their leaves in winter. So at the end of winter, when there's not much food or browsing available in the veld, the anna tree will provide plenty of it. And that makes it a very favorable tree as far as I'm concerned. Just love them. Here is that big baobab again. We've talked about that one. Here's another baobab with a very interesting story. This one stands in the Pafuri in the Kruger Park, but it's unfortunately in an area that is not accessible to the general public. But it is the biggest baobab in the park. It's also known as Bifekenya Barnard's baobab. Now, Barnard was a famous, I don't know if famous is the right word, elephant hunter and poacher that lived in the area 100 and just over 100 years ago. It's a fascinating story. He used to travel on a road past this tree, and I believe he has probably camped under this tree quite a few times, because there was a trading store to the west of here, a couple of miles, and that's where he used to sell his ivory. If you're interested in this sort of history, there's a book by Tom Bulpen, The Ivory Trial. If you can get hold of The Ivory Trial by Tom Bulpen, please read it. You'll find the fascinating story of Bifekenya Barnard and his elephant hunting in those parts. Okay, this is another, I think this is the third biggest baobab in the country. It's on a farm called Buffelsdrift near Swartwater. And I don't think the people in the Cape will know where Swartwater or Buffelsdrift is, but take my word for it, this is a monster of a tree. It's about 100 kilometers from where I live. The leadwoods, we've talked about the leadwoods that can get so very old. This one has a trunk circumference of just over 6 meters. It's a huge tree, but it's standing also on the banks of the Limpopo River, but unfortunately on the wrong bank because it's across the river in Botswana. But it's a giant of a tree. This is one of the really big sycamore figs that we get here. This is also on the Limpopo River. And this illustrates, I don't have a picture of that big sycamore fig in Botswana. That is bigger than our record baobab tree. But this gives you an impression of how big they can get. Interesting also to see that this one was damaged. It made new shoots, and it's now growing strongly again. I've been there about a year ago, but it seems to me something has gone wrong with this tree. It's not in a good shape. I'm not sure that it's still alive. We all know how important trees are because, and you all know the story that they provide oxygen, they provide food, shade, fodder for the animals, nesting site for birds, timber, firewood, and so on and so on. And they store carbon dioxide. We know this. As far as I'm concerned, the whole issue of photosynthesis is one of the greatest wonders of the world. But we know this. What I really want to share a thought or two with you is the very deeper connection between trees and man. I mean, trees are an inspiration to the poets, the philosophers, the artists amongst us. They also seem to calm the mind and to be able to stimulate creative thinking or to hasten the recovery of the sick. And all these things have been found through research. This is not just an opinion. They say that if a person is really sick, put his bed next to the window so that he can see the trees on the outside, and he will recover quicker. But the research has also shown that a walk in the forest can reduce stress. It can strengthen the immune system. It can lower blood pressure, and it can reduce blood sugar levels. And as I say, sick people can recover more quickly. I want to tell you a story about Oregon in the USA. There is a jail specifically for the very violent criminals. Guys that got locked up, but they are really bad news. You know, those are the guys, they're so angry in this world that their shirts don't have sleeves. They torn off the sleeves. They shave their hair, and they put the ugliest tattoos they can think of all over their body. And they're violent people. So the authorities there did an experiment. They exposed these people to images of nature. And they exposed them by projecting it on the walls of the jail. And it was fascinating to see that the violence was reduced significantly just by exposing them to trees and nature. I find that quite interesting. So trees have a much deeper value than what we've seen here, or what we're talking about as the normal things. So as I say, there's an unconscious connection between man and tree. It's aesthetically pleasing. It has a good effect on humans. And I've told you about the Oregon jail. There's a guy by the name of Matt Haig. He is a British author. And he once wrote, Finland is officially the world's happiest country. It is also 70% forest. I believe these facts are related. That's interesting. I got this quote from Dr. John Hanks, who wrote a review of this book of mine. The happy Finland people, there's a reason for that. Trees, of course, face many threats. And I distinguish really between two main types for us here in South Africa. In those forests of the Amazon, of Southeast Asia, of the Congo Basin or so, it is bush clearing and the chopping down of trees. Here in South Africa, I think there are two types of threats that I refer to, main types. The one is botanical pollution, which is really exotic species that invade our land and then dominate the indigenous plant life. And I've given you down here on the slide just a few examples. Like the syringa, the jacarandas, which are this time of the year quite beautiful, but they actually don't belong here. And then the other problem or threat to our trees is bush encroachment. And this is just part of the history of our country. You must remember when the white people moved inland into the country, those people were mostly sheep and cattle farmers. And that's what they made their living from. Other than hunting, they were also hunters, and they thought they could never deplete the number of elephants here. There are just too many. But we know what happened. But the cattle farming also resulted in overgrazing. And you see it wherever you go or wherever you drive through the savannas of this country. You'll see the results of overgrazing, except where people have started clearing it up and repairing the land. What happens in an overgrazed area, that some species take over and they suppress and displace other vegetation and also displace grass. Remember, savanna is open grasslands with trees all over the place. So it's a mixture of grassland and trees. With bush encroachment, it ends up in in a big, thick, impenetrable mass of bushes, usually with thorns. And that seriously reduced the carrying capacity for both livestock and for game. And I've listed here for you just a few of those species that are guilty of bush encroachment: the black fawn, the wild syringa, often in association with Terminalia sericea, the various grevia species. Where I live, this is a big problem, and it goes right across the border way into Botswana. Thickets of grevias or raisin bushes. The sickle bush is known for this, very much so. But even mupane and red bush willow can form bush encroachment. So this is where our threats to the environment is a bit different than those big forests of the world. There, they're chopping down the trees. Here, we actually have to reduce the tree cover of the land. We have to reduce them either mechanically or with poison. And that is a whole new discussion on its own, because cutting trees down mechanically and you don't treat them, you're just inviting more trouble. Because if they then come back, they do it with a vengeance, and they form an even bigger thicket. So it is a problem area for us. But we also have, it's another threat, overexploitation of some species, like the matumi. In Afrikaans, we call it mingerood, and the yellowwoods. The trees that are of concern, I've just listed a few here that comes to mind. It's the pepperbark tree, the bushman tea, the Lebombo wattle, the Newtonia. We've spoken about that a little earlier, the camel thorns. And the matumi is on this list because it has the most beautiful wood you can imagine. In my view, even more beautiful than the yellow wood. We have this shot-owl borer that's an invader from the Far East and is now killing our trees. Maybe we can talk about it a bit later if there is time. Trees can defend themselves against these risks to some degree. There are physical defenses, there are chemical defenses, the bark that can protect the vulnerable inner parts of the tree, especially against fire. So they're not defenseless, but I don't want to go into all that detail. Just here is an example of how the shape of a tree can help it to protect itself against browsers. You can see here how wide the crown is, and that is to prevent the browsers from getting to the browsing on the inside, so they can just browse around it on the edges of the tree, and that's it. Here's a very interesting subject. Animals are unitary organisms, and plants are modular organisms. And this is quite an interesting subject for me. I'll just try and deal with it very briefly. With animals, sperm fertilize an egg. And then you get an embryonic development, and that fetus develops into a known form that will be retained after birth until death. It just grows bigger and bigger. Look at humans. We all look the same. We have one head, 2 ears, 2 eyes, 1 nose, 2 arms, a torso, and so on. We all look exactly the same. Trees are modular organisms, and this does not apply to them. They grow by the repeated iteration of their parts, leaves, shoots, branches, and so on. and no two of them look exactly the same. Let's go back there. The important thing, though, is that if a tree gets damaged, and it gets damaged seriously, it has a much greater ability compared to an animal to start growing again. It can push out new shoots and it can form new trunk. This is an elder down in the Nyasna forests. And look at how this tree, it was very severely damaged at one stage, and it grew up and it's now a big tree again. Here is actually perhaps a better example. This is a weeping bourbon. And you can see more than half of the top section, probably the top 2/3 or 3/4 of the tree has been destroyed. I don't know what happened there. It must have been a serious storm and maybe some lightning, maybe some fire. But you can see it has pushed out new growth and it is now growing strongly again. If this had to happen to an animal, it would have been instantly dead. No question about it. The question of plant intelligence, which you mentioned, is actually a huge subject. We can spend more than an hour, probably a lot more, just on plant intelligence. And this, let's call it science if you want to, started with a book, The Secret Lives of Trees, and it was published by Thompson and Mr. Bird in 1973. This book was based on scientific study, some pseudo-scientific experiments, and even mystical nature worship. And that happened at the time when the New Age thinking was coming to the fore. It was suggested that plants react to human thought. This book grabbed the public attention like you can't believe. And people started playing Mozart to their plants. And some of them still do it today. But some of the so-called science in that book has since been discredited. But there can be no doubt, as some scientists or researchers have pointed out, that plants can make decisions that will affect their growth and ensure their survival. They can differentiate between vibrations caused by browsers and those caused by insects or wind, thereby triggering appropriate chemical defenses. They also communicate by releasing ethylene into the air. Some can even communicate by way of clicking and noises, which I found incredible. And this was a discovery by Professor Suzanne Simon in British Columbia, where she worked in those forests. The question of trees communicating by releasing ethylene is quite an interesting story, and I should perhaps share that with you. In the early 1990s, there was a huge drought, very severe, in many parts of the country. And in what was then called the Northern Transvaal, found that the kudu were dying, plenty of kudu dying, but they died with full stomachs. And they couldn't figure out how is this possible. So Professor Wouter van Hoeven from Tukkies, he got a research team together with some of his postgraduate students, and they came to investigate what was going on here. And they found that the trees were increasing the tannin levels in their leaves, and they were increasing it to such an extent that it became indigestible. So the stomach of the animal was full, but he couldn't digest it, and they actually died of hunger. But what they found was even more fascinating is how the trees communicate this threat to one another. When a tree is browsed on, it releases the ethylene, which is a gas. It goes into the air, and it's then taken by the wind to the next tree. So you'll often see kudu browsing, and they browse a bit on a tree, and then they move on to the next one. It's because of this, because of the tannin levels in the leaves are increased. They then did a test. They took some sticks. They were beating a tree, and even just by beating a tree, the tannin levels were increased, and it was communicated to the next trees. This Professor Suzanne Simert of British Columbia has also found that trees share information and also nutrients through a network of fungi that they call mycorrhizas, and these envelop and connect their roots. So she talks about the wood wide web, and these mycorrhizal filaments, they penetrate the soil like fiber optic cables to extract water and nutrients on behalf of the trees. In exchange, they receive some sugars made by the trees through photosynthesis. So they also, this is the important thing, they're also able to transmit alarm signals, thereby sharing information about things like browsing herbivores. So that is a whole fascinating world of communication that we probably don't know enough about yet. But just to get back to plant intelligence, trees are able to perceive the environment and respond by adjusting their form and the way they function. I don't want to go deeper into that. Trees know when it is day or night, and they know where the light is coming from and how much light is available. They also know to grow towards the light, and the roots know to grow away from the light. How do they know that? Trees are aware of seasonal changes, and they know when to flower and when to produce food and when to drop their leaves. And as we've just explained, they can also communicate threats. Something else that you don't find in many tree books, which I've included a little bit on in this one, is the whole story of underground trees. Now, these trees are found on the high-veld plateaus of South Africa, the Tongaland, Pondoland region of the Indian Ocean coastal belt, the Kalahari, the eastern plains of Angola, and parts of Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique. They're also found in South America. The thing here is that the entire tree is underground, except some green twigs and leaves that emerge from the ground. And what you see is the canopy of a single vast plant whose woody structure is underground, and it's quite large. Why do trees do this? It's protection, and it provides them with safety from above ground threats like frost, like fire. In some areas, trees get inundated by seasonal rains, and they stand in water for who knows how long. Now, these are clonal trees. Remember, we've talked a little bit earlier about clonal and non-clonal trees, and they produce asexually, without seed. And as a bonus, they're also drought resistant. And the oldest living trees, as we've said, are these underground trees. So that is good protection for them, but the risk for them, of course, is pathogens, because they lack the genetic diversity that trees above the ground usually have. And we have more than 200 species in Southern Africa. And they spread over 39 families. I've just got a few pictures here to show you what these look like. Here is one Pavetta van Wykiana, and it's named after Professor Bram van Wyk. Parinari capensis, which is quite a common one. This is a notorious one in the northern parts of the country. Poison leaf, or as they say in Afrikaans, gifblaar. It's responsible for the death of large numbers of livestock, especially this time of the year when there's not much food available. Elandsbeen, again, you look at this little plant. This is just the tip sticking out above the ground. There's a huge tree underneath there. This is one with a beautiful flower, the Ocna barbertonensis. I got this picture from my friend Delia Oosthuizen. She's near Nelspruit. Thank you, Delia. This is quite a new discovery. I believe it was scientifically described for the first time only in 2018. But this is what it looks like. And you get them in those mountains between Nelspruit and Barberton. How are we doing for time? Are we all right, Brett?
We're running quite a bit over, Willem.
Okay, I'll finish up now.
Okay, thank you so much.
The interesting part about trees is how they actually function. If you want to understand the functioning of trees, you have to look at all these aspects. And I've just listed some of the more important ones here, especially the more important ones for me. The various parts, how the trees grow, the uptake of water, the transpiration, the pollination, the seed dispersal, the masting, and so we can go on. What I want to invite the readers to is, yes, make note of this, but then go and read about it. There's a little bit in this book of mine, but not nearly enough, and I don't go into much depth into any of these. But there's a list of very good references at the back of the book where you can find more stuff to read about all these subjects. Go and read up about it, find out more, and then think about it. And when you think about it, you will discover what a wonderful world we actually live in. It's incredible. What we have here now is just a couple of the species that I feature in the book, and I'm not going to take you through all of them. We'll just quickly flick through here. The apple tree, you see, this is savanna that I've talked earlier about. Open grassland, although I can see there looks like there's some bush encroachment in the background there. But this is beautiful savanna with the apple leaf trees. I want to see if there's. No, you'll find these pictures all in the book, those of you who would be interested in it. But I think we've got to call it a day here. I realize I've run well over time. And I apologize for that.
Not Willem, the fact that everybody's still in the room is, I think, is testament to your passion and sharing of this unbelievably huge subject. And thank you very much for sharing this with us. We have asked for questions, and I'm sure we will have you back again and delve deeper into into this topic. Thank you, everybody. We have, as I say, we have welcome questions into the Q&A box. I have got some here in the chat box, which I'll start with first. Let's see here. Marjorie's asked Willem, she says, are the coastal milkwood trees, Cydroxylon inerma, clonal trees? And how old are these ancient trees?
To the best of my knowledge, no, I'm not sure if they're clonal trees. I don't think they are. But they are getting old. I know of one or two very old ones, but I don't know how old. I've not seen any carbon dating tests that have been done on them. But I think it's also such a good wood that it suggests to me they must get quite old, because the wood from those trees have been used to repair ships in the old days when the ships were built of wood, and they started sailing around the Cape of Storms, and those ships got damaged, and it was planks that they found from the rock Ceylon that we used to repair the ships. But if I find out more, I'll somehow communicate it back to you.
Fantastic, thank you. Then Ingrid has asked, is this ever-increasing elephant population in the Kruger endangering the baobabs, or any of the other large trees in the Kruger for that matter?
Yes, it's a controversial subject, and I haven't touched on it, but it is a big subject. The elephants and the trees, and particularly the baobabs. There are people who say that it's not a problem. I'm not in that camp. My view is that they do a lot of damage, not only to the trees, but also to other animal species. Like if you go to the Chobe River, that is prime habitat for the Chobe bushbuck. If you go there now, you're lucky to see a Chobe bushbuck. So I think the elephants are a problem. And I will not go down the rabbit hole of venturing a solution.
Fair enough. Nathan's asked here, I have often wondered how the Bredonia salincia tree acquired the Afrikaans name, the mingerhout. Do you know the origin of the word minger? It's not in the Afrikaans dictionary.
No, sorry, I don't. It's also got an alternative Afrikaans name, waterboekenhout. So maybe it's because the tree looked a little bit like the boekenhout wood. I don't know, but I don't know where mingerhout comes from.
Fair enough. And then just some comments from Julia and Carly and other people saying thank you for the presentation. Super interesting and professional. And of course, never enough time for one talk to go into such a detailed subject. No. Ronnie's asked you, what is the imbalance between CO2 emissions and absorption? Any possibility of planting sufficient trees to equalize that? I think you did say something to a 2 trillion trees or something to offset it.
Yeah, 1.2 trillion trees will negate a decade worth of CO2 emissions into the atmosphere.
Sure.
That's what a study has found. In fact, if I remember correctly, there were 2 studies that came to about the same conclusion.
And then that's over a specific period of time?
I guess when the 1.2 trillion trees have been planted and they are able to absorb the CO2.
Perfect. And then I suppose the final question here for me would be, do you have a favorite tree or trees?
Very difficult to say. It depends on a favorite in what sense. Since I'm a game rancher, I'm interested in the fodder value of the tree. And the Boschia albitrunca, the shepherd's tree, rates very, very highly in my book. It's not one of the biggest trees, but it's one of the very few evergreen trees that we have in the drier western parts of the country. And during winter, it keeps many animals alive. It's also got an immense root system that goes down, if I remember correctly, something like 70 plus meters. Wow. So it gets waters from somewhere, and you can then understand why it is an evergreen. So that's very high up on my list. The mingerhout that we've just talked about, I love that because of the value of the wood. I have one table that I had made some years ago from a matumi. I don't think I'll do it again because you don't get the wood, and it's a protected tree now. It's also a most beautiful tree. And the same goes for tamboti and ulinout. Together, I believe they're better than skunkwood and yellowwood to make traditional furniture. It's just lovely. But then aesthetically, there are many trees that just blow your mind away with how beautiful they are. And I think of the jackalberry, for instance. If you really want to see jackalberries, go up to those Oxbow Lakes in Zambia, in the Luangwa Valley. It'll just blow your mind away.
Wow. Willem, looks like we've come to the end. I'd like to thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your passion, and your time with us. We would love to have you back. Clearly, this is a topic that needs some more investigation, and we could do another whole talk on it. And we'd love to have you back at a time at your convenience. It leaves me to thank all of our guests for joining us today. Always lovely to have you. And we look forward to seeing you on Wednesday, the 4th of December, for our year-end talk. Thanks to Belinda in the background. And Willem, thank you once again. Wishing everybody a good Wednesday and a fantastic rest of the month. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Willem.
Brett.
Cheers.
Thank you. All the very best.
Bye-bye.